A kindergarten teacher became alarmed when 5-year-old twin brothers started bringing food from home for a secret friend. When she followed them after school, what she discovered in their basement made her call 911 from her car. The maple trees lining Oakwood Elementary's playground had begun their annual transformation, their leaves shifting from vibrant green to burnished gold and fiery red. Melanie Porter paused at her classroom window, watching the kindergartners dash across the woodchip-covered ground, their laughter carrying on the crisp September breeze. 4 years into her teaching career, after abandoning the high-pressure world of publishing in Boston, she still found herself marveling at the pure, uncomplicated joy of 5-year-olds at play. All except two. Her gaze drifted to the Bennett twins, huddled together on a bench beneath the slide. Liam and Noah sat with their shoulders touching, dark blonde heads bent close as they whispered to each other, oblivious to the chaos of tag and make-believe swirling around them. Identical in appearance with their serious hazel eyes and button noses, they'd always been quiet compared to their classmates, but lately, that quietness had taken on a different quality, something that triggered Melanie's carefully honed teacher's intuition. "Miss Porter, Jason took my dinosaur again." The indignant voice of Zoe Matthews pulled Melanie's attention away from the window. "I'm coming, Zoe. Remember what we talked about using our words." Melanie smiled reassuringly at the pigtailed girl before casting one more concerned glance at the twins. She talked to them after recess. By the time the bell rang, summoning 20 excited kindergartners back to class, Melanie had nearly convinced herself she was overreacting. The Bennett family had been through a terrible ordeal just 6 months earlier when Claire Bennett lost her battle with breast cancer. It was natural for the boys to be withdrawn, to cling to each other for comfort. She'd give them space, monitor the situation. That resolution lasted until lunchtime. "Liam, honey, aren't you hungry today?" Melanie crouched beside the small table where the twins sat, their matching blue lunch boxes open before them. What caught her attention wasn't what they were eating, but what they were doing. Carefully dividing their sandwiches and apple slices, wrapping half in napkins, then secreting the bundles into their backpacks when they thought no one was looking. Liam's eyes widened at being caught, a flash of fear crossing his face before he masked it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I ate breakfast late, Miss Porter." Noah nodded vigorously. "Me too. Daddy made pancakes." The rehearsed quality of their responses sent a ripple of unease through Melanie. She'd been teaching long enough to recognize when children were hiding something. "Is there a reason you're saving part of your lunch?" she asked gently, keeping her tone curious rather than accusatory. The twins exchanged a look, one of those silent communications that fascinated Melanie, the secret language that seemed to exist between identical siblings. Noah broke first. "It's for our secret friend," he blurted, then immediately clamped his small hand over his mouth, eyes darting to his brother. Liam shot Noah a look of betrayal before quickly adding, "It's just pretend, Miss Porter. We're playing." "A secret friend?" Melanie kept her voice light despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. "That sounds interesting. Does your secret friend have a name?" The twins' faces closed like shutters. "We have to finish lunch," Liam murmured, suddenly intensely focused on his half-eaten sandwich. Melanie knew better than to push further. "Well, if you ever want to tell me about your secret friend, I'm always here to listen," she said, squeezing Liam's shoulder gently before standing. As she moved away to help another student with a stubborn juice box, Melanie mentally cataloged this incident alongside the other concerning observations she'd made over the past 3 weeks. The twins arriving in the same clothes 3 days in a row, Noah falling asleep during story time, both boys flinching when the classroom door opened unexpectedly, the dark smudges beneath their eyes that spoke of disrupted sleep. Any one of these signs might be explained away, their father working long hours as he adjusted to single parenthood, the natural upheaval that follows a family tragedy. But taken together alongside this new behavior of hoarding food, Melanie's thoughts were interrupted by a tug on her cardigan. She looked down to find Noah standing beside her, his small face solemn. "Miss Porter," he whispered, glancing back at his brother, who was occupied wiping down their table with exaggerated thoroughness. "Our friend gets really hungry sometimes." Before she could respond, he scurried back to join Liam, leaving Melanie with a cold not forming in her stomach. That evening, after the last of her students had been collected by parents and caregivers, Melanie sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen. The email she'd sent to Richard Bennett 3 days earlier regarding the twins' fatigue remained unanswered, as had her previous 2 attempts to schedule a parent-teacher conference. With a sigh, she began typing again. Mr. Bennett, I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out again regarding Liam and Noah, as I've noticed some concerning changes in their behavior that I'd like to discuss with you. I understand this is a difficult time for your family, but a brief meeting would be very helpful. Please let me know what time might work for you this week. Best regards, Melanie Porter. She hit send without much hope of a response. Richard Bennett had been increasingly absent from school functions since his wife's passing. While he'd once been a fixture at PTA meetings and classroom events, his recent interactions had been limited to hurried drop-offs and pickups, during which the once friendly man barely made eye contact. Melanie gathered her belongings and headed for the parking lot, her mind still on the twins and their mysterious secret friend. In the 7 years she'd been teaching, first in inner-city Boston and now here in suburban Oakwood Hills, she'd developed a sixth sense for detecting when a child was in trouble. Something in the Bennett household wasn't right, and the knot in her stomach tightened at the thought of those 2 solemn little boys carrying a burden too heavy for their narrow shoulders. Her silver Honda was the last car in the staff parking lot. As she unlocked the door, movement near the school's entrance caught her eye. The Bennett twins stood hand in hand beside their father's black SUV, their matching navy backpacks bulging. Richard Bennett had his phone pressed to his ear, his expression distant as he ushered the boys into the vehicle. Even from this distance, Melanie could see the stark contrast between the man before her and the engaged father she'd met at the beginning of the school year. His clothes were rumpled, his beard untrimmed, dark circles prominent beneath his eyes. Grief did strange things to people, Melanie knew. Some threw themselves into routines with fervor. Others withdrew completely. Still, as she watched the SUV pull away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than a family struggling with loss. The following morning brought torrential rain and a classroom full of energetic kindergartners trapped indoors for recess. Melanie had just finished orchestrating an impromptu puppet show when she noticed Liam standing alone by the cubbies, surreptitiously examining the contents of other children's lunch boxes. "Liam?" she called softly, approaching him with measured steps to avoid startling him. "Are you looking for something, sweetheart?" The little boy jumped guiltily, his hands jerking away from Penny Williams' Care Bears lunchbox. I was just looking," he stammered, his normally pale cheeks flushed with color. "Did you forget your lunch today?" Melanie asked, noting that neither twin had unpacked a lunchbox that morning. Liam shook his head, eyes fixed on his light-up sneakers. "Daddy said he'd bring it later. He was running late." Another piece of the puzzling behavior slid into place. "That's okay," Melanie assured him. "I have extra snacks in my desk for days just like this. Let's find something for you and Noah until your dad comes. Okay?" Relief washed over the boy's face, quickly followed by a frown. Can I have extra? For later." The request, spoken in a near whisper, sent another wave of concern through Melanie. She led Liam to her desk and opened the drawer where she kept emergency granola bars and fruit cups. "Of course you can, sweetie. Take whatever you and Noah need." The boy's small hands hovered uncertainly over the offerings before selecting 2 granola bars and a fruit cup. He hesitated, then added another fruit cup, clutching the items to his chest as though afraid they might be taken away. "Thank you, Miss Porter," he murmured, the genuine gratitude in his voice making Melanie's heart twist painfully. "Liam," she said gently, crouching to meet his eyes. "If you're ever hungry, or if you need anything at all, you can always tell me. That's what I'm here for. Okay?" He nodded solemnly before scurrying back to join his brother, who had been watching the interaction with anxious eyes from across the room. Melanie observed as Liam showed Noah his treasure trove. The twins' heads bent together in their characteristic pose as they whispered urgently. Richard Bennett never arrived with the promised lunches. When dismissal time came, Melanie made a decision. She quickly packed up her belongings and headed to her car, positioning it where she could observe the parent pickup area without being obvious. She watched as Richard arrived 15 minutes late, barely acknowledging his sons as they climbed into the back seat. The SUV pulled away, and after a moment's hesitation, Melanie followed at a discreet distance. She knew what she was doing crossed professional boundaries. She knew the proper channels involved documenting her concerns, consulting with the school counselor, potentially contacting social services. But something about the twins' behavior, their furtive whispers and frightened eyes, compelled her to act now rather than wait for bureaucratic wheels to turn. The Bennett SUV wound through Oakwood Hills' tree-lined streets before pulling into a gas station. Richard emerged, heading into the convenience store alone while leaving the engine running. Through the car's back window, Melanie could see the twins engaged in animated conversation, their small hands gesturing urgently. After Richard returned to his vehicle, they continued to a sprawling Victorian house set back from the road behind a wrought iron fence. The once immaculate garden had become overgrown, with unraked leaves carpeting the lawn and untrimmed hedges encroaching on the walkway. Melanie parked across the street, watching as Richard ushered the twins inside before checking his watch and hurrying back to his car. Within minutes, he'd driven away, leaving the boys alone. Melanie sat frozen, uncertain what to do next. She'd confirmed the twins were being left unsupervised. Concerning but not necessarily unusual for a single working parent without adequate childcare options. She was about to start her car when movement at the side of the house caught her attention. Liam and Noah had emerged from the front door, still wearing their backpacks. Instead of playing in the yard as she might have expected, they moved with purpose toward the back of the property, constantly glancing over their shoulders as though afraid of being observed. Heart pounding, Melanie exited her car and crossed the street, keeping to the shelter of mature oak trees that lined the sidewalk. She reached the edge of the Bennett property just in time to see the twins disappear down a set of steps that led to a cellar door. For several long minutes, she stood irresolute, rain seeping through her cardigan, uncertain how to proceed. Following the children felt like an invasion of privacy, yet leaving without understanding what was happening felt impossible. The decision was made for her when she heard a cry, faint but distinct, emanating from somewhere beneath the house. Moving as quietly as she could, Melanie skirted the perimeter of the property until she reached the back. The cellar entrance where the twins had disappeared was now closed. Nearby, partially obscured by overgrown rhododendrons, was a ground-level window. Melanie crouched beside it, brushing aside wet leaves to peer into the dimly lit basement. What she saw turned her blood to ice. The basement was mostly unfinished, with concrete floors and exposed beams. In one corner, however, a space had been cleared and furnished with a tattered mattress, a ragged blanket, and a small pile of children's books. Sitting cross-legged on the mattress was a boy, older than the twins but still young, perhaps 7 or 8, with matted brown hair and a gaunt face. He wore pajamas that hung loosely on his thin frame, and he clutched a well-worn teddy bear to his chest. The twins sat before him, their backpacks open as they solemnly presented their offerings. The granola bars and fruit cups from Melanie's desk, alongside half sandwiches and juice boxes from their previous day's lunch. "We got extra today," Noah was saying, his voice audible through the thin glass. "Miss Porter gave it to us." The strange boy accepted the food with trembling hands, his eyes darting nervously toward the ceiling. "Did your dad see you?" he whispered, the fear in his voice unmistakable. Liam shook his head. "He left for work again. He won't be back until after dinner." "You have to be more careful," the boy urged, already unwrapping a granola bar and taking a desperate bite. "If he catches you." "We're being super sneaky," Noah assured him. "No one knows about our secret friend." The boy's next words froze Melanie in place. "I want to go home. I miss my mom and dad." "Daddy says you can't," Liam replied, his small face troubled. "He says bad people will find you if you leave the safe place." "Your dad is the bad person," the boy said, his voice cracking. "He took me away from my parents. They're probably looking everywhere for me." Noah's lower lip trembled. "But Daddy says your parents didn't want you anymore." That's why you're our new brother now. The boy shook his head vehemently. That's not true. I was at the park with my mom. Your dad grabbed me when she wasn't looking and put me in his car. His voice dropped to a frightened whisper. He said if I screamed or tried to run away, he'd hurt my parents. Melanie stumbled backward. Her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her gasp. Her mind raced to process what she was witnessing. A kidnapped child, hidden in the Bennett basement, with two 5-year-olds unwittingly complicit in keeping him captive. She scrambled back to the shelter of a large oak tree, fumbling for her phone with shaking hands. It took 3 attempts to successfully dial 911, her fingers numb with cold and shock. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice seemed surreal against the horror unfolding before her. My name is Melanie Porter, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm a kindergarten teacher at Oakwood Elementary. She swallowed hard. I've discovered a kidnapped child in the basement of one of my students' homes. The words sounded unbelievable even as she spoke them. Can you verify your location, ma'am? 78 Hawthorne Drive in Oakwood Hills, Melanie replied, recalling the address from school records. It's the Bennett residence. Richard Bennett lives here with his twin sons, but there's another boy locked in the basement. He appears to be 7 or 8 years old, malnourished, and he just said he was taken from a park while with his mother. Are you in immediate danger, Ms. Porter? Are any of the children in immediate danger? Melanie peered around the tree, confirming that the house remained still. No, the father has left for work. The twin boys are in the basement with the other child. They've been sneaking food to him. Officers are being dispatched to your location, the dispatcher assured her. Please remain where you are until they arrive. Can you safely continue to observe the situation without being detected? Yes, I think so, Melanie replied, though her heart was pounding so loudly she feared it might give her away. Can you describe the kidnapped child? Melanie closed her eyes, summoning the image of the boy on the mattress. White male, probably 7 or 8 years old. Brown hair, very thin, wearing blue pajamas. He has a teddy bear with him. He said he was taken from a park while with his mother. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity as Melanie maintained her position, alternating between watching the basement window and scanning the street for approaching police. When 2 patrol cars finally pulled up, lights flashing but sirens silent, she emerged from her hiding place on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her. The events that followed seemed to unfold in slow motion. Officers securing the perimeter of the house. Melanie explaining what she'd witnessed, her teacher's voice surprisingly steady despite her inner turmoil. The moment when officers breached the cellar door, emerging minutes later with 3 small figures, the twins clinging to each other in terror, the unknown boy blinking in the daylight as though he hadn't seen the sun in months. More police cars arrived, followed by an ambulance. Melanie found herself sitting in the back of a patrol car with a shock blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching as paramedics examined the rescued boy. Nearby, a female officer knelt before the twins, speaking to them with gentle firmness. Ms. Porter, a detective with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes approached, notepad in hand. I'm Detective Morgan. We'll need a full statement from you, but first, I wanted to let you know. The boy's name is Christopher Reynolds. He was abducted from Fairfield 6 months ago. His parents have been notified and are on their way. The name struck a distant chord in Melanie's memory. A news story she'd scrolled past, one of many missing children reports that flashed across screens daily. Tragic but removed from her immediate world. Until now. The twins, she said, her voice hoarse. Liam and Noah. They didn't understand what was happening. They thought they were helping. Detective Morgan nodded grimly. From what we can gather, their father convinced them the boy needed to be kept hidden from bad people. They believed they were protecting him. He shook his head, the gesture conveying what words couldn't. The incomprehensible manipulation of innocent minds. A commotion at the police perimeter drew their attention. Richard Bennett had returned, his face a mask of disbelief as officers surrounded his vehicle, weapons drawn, ordering him to exit with his hands visible. Did you know him well? Detective Morgan asked as they watched Richard being handcuffed, his protests audible even from a distance. Melanie shook her head slowly. Not really. He was involved in school activities before his wife died from cancer earlier this year. Afterward, he withdrew. I tried to reach out to discuss changes in the twins' behavior, but she trailed off, the enormity of what she'd failed to see overwhelming her. This isn't on you, the detective said firmly, reading her expression. Bennett went to extraordinary lengths to maintain a normal appearance. The boys were still attending school, still receiving medical care. On paper, nothing would have triggered serious concerns. But Melanie couldn't shake the guilt that wrapped around her heart like a vice. She should have pushed harder, acted sooner, recognized the signs for what they were. As she watched Richard Bennett being placed in a police car, his face now contorted with rage, she thought of the twins. How they would have to reconcile their father's betrayal. How they would have to rebuild their understanding of right and wrong. And she thought of Christopher Reynolds, who had endured 6 months of captivity, sustained in part by the small kindnesses of 2 5-year-olds who didn't understand the true nature of the game their father had forced them to play. The maple leaves continued to drift down around them, beautiful and oblivious to the darkness that had been festering behind the tidy facade of 78 Hawthorne Drive. A darkness Melanie Porter had glimpsed through a basement window on a rainy autumn afternoon, changing forever the lives of 3 little boys and her own. 3 days after the discovery at the Bennett house, Melanie sat in a sterile conference room at the Oakwood Hills Police Department, a foam cup of tepid coffee clutched between her hands. The wall clock's ticking seemed unnaturally loud as Detective Morgan reviewed her statement for the 3rd time. And you had no previous indication that Richard Bennett might be capable of something like this? He asked, his weathered face revealing nothing. Melanie shook her head, the motion feeling mechanical after so many repetitions. Nothing beyond the changes I noticed in the twins' behavior. They were withdrawing, seemed tired, started hoarding food. She paused, the guilt that had become her constant companion surging again. I should have pushed harder when he canceled our meetings. I should have. Ms. Porter, Detective Morgan interrupted gently. You followed your instincts when many would have dismissed them. Without your intervention, we might never have found Christopher Reynolds. The detective's words offered little comfort. In the endless loop of second-guessing that had consumed Melanie's thoughts since that rainy afternoon, one question persisted. What if she'd waited another day, another week? What happens to Liam and Noah now? She asked, steering the conversation away from her own actions. Morgan sighed, closing his notepad. They're currently in emergency foster care. Their aunt, Claire Bennett's sister, is flying in from Seattle tomorrow. Assuming everything checks out, they'll likely be placed with her. And Christopher? Physically, he's malnourished and showing signs of vitamin deficiency, but doctors are optimistic about his recovery. Morgan's professional demeanor softened slightly. Psychologically, that's going to be a longer road. He was kept isolated for 6 months, told his parents had abandoned him. The twins were his only regular human contact. Melanie closed her eyes briefly, imagining the lonely basement room, the little boy clutching his teddy bear, his only comfort the secret visits from 2 kindergartners who believed they were playing a special game. Has Richard confessed? She asked, opening her eyes to find Morgan studying her with something like compassion. Yes and no. He acknowledges taking the boy but claims he was rescuing him. Morgan's tone made clear what he thought of this defense. His wife's oncologist confirmed she'd been trying to have another child before her diagnosis. They'd been discussing adoption when her cancer was discovered. So in his grief, he just took someone else's child? The horror of it still felt unreal to Melanie, like something from a psychological thriller rather than events unfolding in her quiet community. Grief can distort reality in profound ways, Morgan replied, his gaze distant for a moment before refocusing. Bennett's attorney will likely pursue an insanity defense. Whether that will succeed, he shrugged. That's for the courts to decide. A soft knock interrupted them. A younger officer poked his head into the room. Detective, the Reynolds family is here to speak with Ms. Porter. Melanie's heart stuttered. She hadn't expected this, wasn't prepared to face the parents of the child she'd found, to see in their eyes either gratitude she didn't deserve or recrimination for not acting sooner. "I can tell them you're not up for visitors," Morgan offered, reading her expression. Melanie straightened her shoulders. "No, it's fine. I'll see them." The couple who entered moments later looked nothing like the polished, smiling family from the missing person flyers that had plastered the region 6 months earlier. Angela Reynolds was a slight woman with auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, deep shadows beneath eyes that had clearly shed too many tears. Her husband Michael was tall and broad-shouldered, but his posture spoke of a man who had been hollowed out from within, his once robust frame now carrying an invisible weight. "Ms. Porter," Angela said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We wanted to thank you in person." Melanie rose uncertainly, accepting the woman's outstretched hands. "Please call me Melanie, and there's no need for thanks. I only wish I'd realized sooner what was happening." "You found our son," Michael stated simply, his voice rough with emotion. "When everyone else had given up, when the police had moved on to other cases, when the news crews stopped showing up, you found him." The raw gratitude in his words made Melanie's throat constrict. "How is Christopher doing?" Angela's composure wavered. He's alive. He remembers us. After the first day of shock, he wouldn't stop hugging us." Her voice broke. "But he's afraid of the dark now, afraid of being alone. He keeps asking about the little boys who brought him food." "Liam and Noah," Melanie supplied softly. "They didn't understand what their father had done. They thought they were helping keep Christopher safe." Michael nodded grimly. "The police explained that. It's hard to reconcile our anger at what happened with the knowledge that 2 children were trying their best in an impossible situation." "Will you testify at the trial?" Angela asked, her gaze suddenly intense. "About what you saw, what led you to follow the twins that day?" "Of course," Melanie assured her, though the thought of publicly recounting the events made her stomach twist. "Whatever I can do to help." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, the 3 of them navigating the strange intimacy that comes from being connected by tragedy. When the Reynolds finally departed, promising to keep Melanie updated on Christopher's progress, she remained seated, attempting to process the surreal reality that had become her life. "You okay to drive home?" Detective Morgan asked, returning to collect her statement. Melanie nodded, gathering her belongings. "I'm fine. Just processing." Morgan's expression was knowing. Cases involving children are the hardest, especially when there's no clear villain, just broken people making terrible choices. As Melanie drove home through streets lined with manicured lawns and tasteful Halloween decorations, she reflected on Morgan's words. Richard Bennett wasn't a monster from a fairy tale. He was a grieving man whose mind had fractured under the weight of loss. The twins weren't accomplices but victims themselves, manipulated by the father they trusted. Even Christopher, for all the trauma he'd endured, had formed a complex relationship with the twins. His captors and his saviors rolled into one. The comfortable certainties of Melanie's world had been upended, revealing the Messier truth beneath. That darkness could exist behind the most ordinary facades, that good people could be driven to terrible acts, that salvation sometimes came in the smallest packages. 2 little boys sneaking food to a prisoner they'd been told to keep secret. The classroom felt eerily quiet without the twins. Their empty cubbies and vacant seats at the reading circle were constant reminders of the upheaval that had torn through their young lives. Melanie had explained their absence to the class with a simplified truth. Liam and Noah's daddy was sick and needed special help, so they were staying with their aunt for a while. The children had accepted this with the resilience of 5-year-olds, asking a few curious questions before moving on to more immediate concerns like whose turn it was with the classroom hamster. But for Melanie, maintaining normalcy required a performance she wasn't sure she could sustain. News of Christopher Reynolds' rescue had dominated local headlines for days. While authorities had worked to keep the twins' identities protected due to their age, Melanie's role in the discovery had become public knowledge. Parents eyed her with a mixture of admiration and wariness during drop-offs. Colleagues stopped conversations when she entered the staff room, and Principal Grayson had gently suggested she take a leave of absence, until things settled down. Melanie had refused. Work was the only thing keeping her from disappearing into an endless spiral of what-ifs and should-haves. Her students needed consistency, especially now, when hushed adult conversations and snippets of news had created an atmosphere of unease even they could sense. 2 weeks after the discovery, Catherine Bennett, the twins' aunt, requested a meeting. Melanie recognized her immediately when she arrived after school hours. She had Claire's delicate features and the same serious eyes as the twins, though hers were reddened from recent tears. "Thank you for seeing me," Catherine said as they settled in the small chairs at Melanie's reading table. "I know this isn't a formal parent-teacher conference, but I wanted to talk about the boys. How are they doing?" Melanie asked, the question that had haunted her since watching Liam and Noah being led to a social worker's car, clinging to each other in bewildered fear. Catherine's composure wavered momentarily. "It's complicated. Physically, they're fine. Emotionally," she trailed off, searching for words. "They're confused, frightened. Noah has nightmares. Liam has stopped speaking almost entirely." "I'm so sorry," Melanie whispered, imagining the cheerful, if quiet, boys she'd known reduced to such states. "Are they seeing someone?" "A therapist who specializes in childhood trauma. 3 times a week," Catherine confirmed. "The therapist says they're suffering from a complex form of psychological manipulation. Richard convinced them they were heroes, protecting Christopher from nebulous, bad people. Finding out their father was the villain in the story, it's shattered their understanding of the world." Melanie nodded, her heart aching. Children that age have a black-and-white view of good and bad. This situation is confusing even for adults to process. "The therapist suggested it might help for them to see you," Catherine continued, her gaze direct. "You were a stable figure in their lives before all this happened. And unlike everyone else they encounter now, you don't look at them with suspicion or pity." The request caught Melanie off guard. "Of course, I'd be happy to see them. Do you think they'd want to come back to class? Or perhaps I could visit you at home first." "Home visits would be best to start," Catherine agreed, relief evident in her voice. "Their therapist suggested familiar environments are important right now. We're staying at my sister's house, Richard's house, until arrangements can be made to sell it. Not ideal, I know, but moving them again right now seemed worse." The thought of the twins still living in the house where Christopher had been imprisoned made Melanie's skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral. "I understand. Just let me know when would be a good time." As Catherine stood to leave, she hesitated, then asked the question Melanie had been dreading. "Did you suspect, before you followed them that day? Were there signs we all missed?" The weight of potential accusation in the question was unmistakable. "There were concerns," Melanie admitted carefully. "The twins were withdrawing, seemed exhausted, started hiding food. I tried to contact Richard multiple times, but he canceled meetings, didn't return calls. I was worried about potential neglect. Not—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Catherine nodded, her expression unreadable. "Claire always said Richard was the perfect father. After she got sick, he seemed determined to prove her right. None of us saw this coming." She pulled on her coat with jerky movements. "The police found journals in his office. Pages and pages about how he was completing our family the way Claire wanted. How the 3 boys would grow up as brothers." Her voice hardened. "He wrote about it like it was some beautiful gift he was giving my sister from beyond the grave, not a kidnapping." Melanie remained silent, understanding that Catherine wasn't looking for a response so much as a witness to her pain. The dual burden of supporting her traumatized nephews while processing her own shock and grief. "I'll call you to set up a time," Catherine said finally, composing herself with visible effort. "Thank you again, Ms. Porter." After Catherine left, Melanie sat alone in her classroom, surrounded by alphabet charts and finger paintings, evidence of the orderly, nurturing world she tried to create for her students. How easily that order could be disrupted, she thought. How fragile the boundaries between safety and danger, sanity and madness, love and obsession. The Bennett house looked different in daylight than it had on that rainy afternoon when Melanie had made her discovery. The police tape was gone. The overgrown lawn had been mowed, and cheerful mums had been planted in the front beds. Catherine's attempt, Melanie supposed, to normalize an environment that would forever be associated with darkness. She hesitated on the front porch, hand raised to knock, when the door swung open to reveal Noah. The little boy stared up at her with solemn eyes that seemed to belong to someone much older. "Miss Porter," he said, his voice small but steady. "Aunt Katie said you were coming." Melanie crouched to his level, offering a warm smile that concealed her shock at how thin he'd become in just 3 weeks. "Hello, Noah. I've missed you at school. May I come in?" He nodded, stepping back to allow her entry. The interior of the house was immaculate, with no visible evidence of the tragedy that had unfolded here. Family photos lined the walls. Claire Bennett's smiling face featured prominently, her resemblance to the twins striking. Of Richard, there was no trace. The photos that had once included him had been removed, leaving conspicuous gaps in the displays. "Liam's in the playroom," Noah informed her, taking her hand with the casual trust of childhood. "He doesn't talk much anymore." "That's okay," Melanie assured him as he led her down a hallway. Sometimes after scary things happen, people need time before they're ready to talk again. The playroom was a large, sunny space filled with books, toys, and a child-sized table where Liam sat drawing with intense concentration. He didn't look up when they entered, his crayon moving in careful, deliberate strokes across the paper. "Look who's here, Liam," Noah announced, squeezing Melanie's hand. "It's Miss Porter." Liam's head jerked up, his eyes widening as they fixed on Melanie. For a heartbeat, she feared he might cry or retreat, but instead, he carefully set down his crayon and rose from the table, approaching her with measured steps. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face against her sweater. Melanie returned the hug gently, meeting Catherine's eyes over the boy's head as she appeared in the doorway. The silent exchange conveyed volumes. Relief that Liam was responding, concern over his continued silence, shared worry for what lay ahead. "I'm so happy to see you both," Melanie said as Liam finally released her. "I brought something for you." She reached into her tote bag and withdrew 2 identical stuffed dragons. One blue, one green. "I thought you might like these. Sometimes when we're having big feelings that are hard to talk about, it helps to have a special friend to hold on to." Noah accepted the green dragon with a small smile, while Liam clutched the blue one to his chest, his eyes conveying the gratitude his voice wouldn't express. "Would you like to show me what you've been drawing, Liam?" Melanie asked, following him back to the table. The drawing depicted 3 stick figures holding hands, 2 small ones on either side of a taller one. Above them, Liam had carefully printed "My Family" in wobbly capital letters. "Is this you and Noah with your Aunt Catherine?" Melanie asked gently. Liam shook his head, picking up a crayon to add another figure to the drawing. A woman with a smiling face and yellow hair. "That's our mom in heaven," Noah explained, leaning against Melanie's side. "And that's us with Christopher. He's our friend." The revelation startled Melanie. The taller figure between the twins wasn't an adult, but the boy they'd been secretly feeding, the captive they'd been unwittingly helping to keep. "Christopher is your friend?" she echoed carefully. Noah nodded, his expression earnest. "We took care of him when Daddy said he needed to be safe. Christopher told us stories and taught us how to play chess with the paper pieces we made." His face clouded. "But Daddy was lying. Christopher didn't need to be hidden. Daddy stole him from his real mom and dad." The matter-of-fact way Noah stated this terrible truth broke Melanie's heart. "That must have been very confusing to learn," she said, struggling to find words appropriate for a 5-year-old grappling with such complex trauma. "Dr. Becky says our daddy's brain got very sick after Mommy died," Noah continued, referring to their therapist. "He did a very bad thing, but it wasn't our fault. We didn't know." Liam had returned to his drawing, adding a sad face to the stick figure of Christopher. The silent commentary spoke volumes about his understanding of the situation. Catherine appeared with a tray of cookies and apple juice, her movements deliberately casual, though her eyes remained watchful. "Why don't you show Ms. Porter your new books?" she suggested to the twins. The ones Dr. Becky gave you about different kinds of families. The afternoon unfolded in a surreal blend of normalcy and underlying sorrow. The twins showed Melanie their toys and books, occasionally offering glimpses into their therapy sessions through comments like, Dr. Becky says it's okay to be angry, or we're learning about safe adults we can trust. Noah did most of the talking while Liam communicated through nods, gestures, and drawings, a system the brothers had clearly developed to accommodate Liam's selective mutism. Throughout the visit, Melanie maintained her teacher's composure, responding with appropriate warmth and encouragement. But beneath the surface, each interaction was a reminder of innocence shattered, of childhood warped by adult actions beyond the twins' comprehension. As she prepared to leave, Catherine walked her to the door while the boys remained in the playroom. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "That's the most animated I've seen them since everything happened." "They're remarkably resilient," Melanie replied, though the words seemed inadequate for the monumental task facing these children. Rebuilding their understanding of family, safety, and trust after having those foundations utterly destroyed. Catherine's eyes filled with tears she clearly fought to contain. "The therapist says children can recover from almost anything with proper support. But sometimes I look at them and wonder what this will do to them in the long run. How do you move forward when your father is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "One day at a time," Melanie offered, the platitude falling short, but it was all she had. "And they have you. That stability is crucial." "There's something else I wanted to tell you," Catherine said, lowering her voice further. "Christopher's parents contacted me. They want the boys to meet with Christopher, in a therapeutic setting, with professional guidance. They think it might help all 3 children process what happened." Melanie's breath caught. "Do you think that's wise?" "I don't know," Catherine admitted. "The therapist thinks it could be beneficial, given the unusual bond that formed. The twins still ask about Christopher daily. And according to his parents, he asks about the little boys too." She sighed heavily. In some twisted way, they were each other's lifeline during that awful time. Christopher wasn't completely alone because of Liam and Noah. And the twins, manipulated as they were, felt they were doing something good by helping him. The complexity of the situation was staggering. 3 children, none older than 7, navigating a trauma bond forged in the most unimaginable circumstances. "When would this meeting happen?" Melanie asked. "Next week, if I agree to it." Catherine ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of uncertainty. "I wanted your opinion as someone who knows the boys in a different context. You're an educator, you understand child development." The weight of being asked to weigh in on such a momentous decision wasn't lost on Melanie. "I think," she began carefully, "children are often more capable of processing difficult truths than we give them credit for, especially with proper support. This meeting might give all 3 boys a chance to reframe their relationship in a healthy context, under the guidance of people who care about them." Catherine nodded, seeming to draw strength from Melanie's perspective. "That's what I was thinking too. I'll call the Reynolds tonight." As Melanie drove away from the Bennett house, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the street, she found herself reflecting on the hidden complexities that existed beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-seeming lives. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a kindergarten teacher concerned about 2 quiet boys who seemed tired and hungry. Now she was entangled in a story of grief, madness, kidnapping, and the remarkable resilience of children forced to make sense of an adult world gone horribly wrong. The twins' drawing stayed with her, 3 stick figures holding hands, a family of their own creation in the midst of chaos. Despite everything, Liam and Noah had formed a genuine connection with the boy their father had imprisoned. They had shown kindness when they had little else to give, sneaking food and companionship to a child they believed needed their help. In the most unlikely of circumstances, humanity had persisted, and perhaps that, Melanie thought, was the glimmer of hope in this otherwise dark tale, the reminder that compassion could emerge in the most unexpected places, from the most unexpected people, even 2 little boys caught in a nightmare not of their making. The conference room at the Child Advocacy Center had been carefully designed to feel welcoming. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, walls painted in soothing blues and greens. Child-friendly artwork hung at eye level for the young clients who came here to tell their stories, seek healing, and, in rare cases like this one, confront the complex aftermath of trauma in a controlled, supportive environment. Melanie sat in a corner, present at Catherine's request as a familiar face for the twins, but instructed to remain a silent observer. Across the room, the Reynolds family waited, Angela perched anxiously on the edge of a sofa, Michael standing protectively behind her, Christopher between them, clutching his now familiar teddy bear. The boy looked markedly different from when Melanie had glimpsed him through the basement window 3 weeks earlier. His hair was neatly trimmed, his clothes new, his face less gaunt. But his eyes still held a wariness beyond his years, darting constantly to the door as though assessing escape routes. Dr. Rebecca Chen, Dr. Becky, to her young clients, orchestrated the delicate meeting with the calm authority of someone accustomed to navigating emotional minefields. "Christopher," she said gently, "remember what we talked about? Liam and Noah are coming today because you all shared a difficult experience. They didn't know what their father was doing was wrong. They thought they were helping you." Christopher nodded solemnly, his grip on the teddy bear tightening. "They brought me food," he said, his voice small but clear, "and books, and they made a chess set out of paper so we could play." "That's right, Dr. Chen affirmed. "And today is about understanding that what happened wasn't their fault, just like it wasn't your fault." A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of the twins. They entered holding hands, Catherine's steadying presence behind them. Noah's eyes immediately found Christopher, widening in recognition. Liam, still silent, pressed against his brother's side. The blue dragon Melanie had given him clutched in his free hand. For a long moment no one spoke. The adults watched with bated breath as 3 traumatized children regarded each other across a divide far greater than the few feet of carpeted floor between them. It was Christopher who broke the silence. "You got a haircut," he said to Noah, the ordinary observation somehow perfect in its simplicity. Noah nodded. "Aunt Katie took us to a special place where they give you a lollipop after." "I got a lollipop at the doctor's," Christopher replied, taking a hesitant step forward. "It was cherry. I like the blue ones better," Noah said, mirroring the step. Liam remained frozen in place, his eyes fixed on Christopher with an intensity that spoke volumes. Slowly, deliberately, he released his brother's hand and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a folded paper object. He extended it toward Christopher. Dr. Chun nodded encouragingly, and Christopher moved forward to accept the offering. "It's a chess knight," he said, carefully unfolding the origami piece. "You remembered how to make them." Liam nodded, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. "Would you 3 like to sit together at the activity table?" Dr. Chun suggested, gesturing to a child-sized table stocked with paper, crayons, and simple games. The children moved toward it with the natural gravity that sometimes exists between young peers who have shared significant experiences. As they settled at the table, Christopher between the twins, the adults exhaled a collective breath. "This is going better than I expected," Angela whispered, her hand finding her husband's. Catherine nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Liam hasn't responded to anyone like that since it happened." The remainder of the session unfolded with careful guidance from Dr. Chun, who facilitated age-appropriate discussions about the children's shared experiences, emphasizing repeatedly that none of them were at fault for Richard Bennett's actions. The therapeutic goals were modest for this initial meeting, establishing that all 3 boys were safe now, reinforcing that adults were working to help them heal, and validating the genuine connections they had formed despite the terrible circumstances. As the session drew to a close, Christopher surprised everyone by addressing Liam directly. "I miss playing chess with you," he said quietly. "You're the only kid I know who plays." Liam stared at him for a long moment before reaching for a crayon and a sheet of paper. With careful precision, he drew a simple checkerboard pattern and wrote across the top, "Can we play again sometime?" Christopher read the message and nodded vigorously. "My mom and dad said maybe we could see each other sometimes. If if that's okay with you guys. We'd like that, Noah answered, looking to his aunt for confirmation. Right, Aunt Katie? Catherine, clearly emotional but maintaining composure for the twins' sake, nodded. Yes, if Christopher's parents agree, we can arrange visits. The simple exchange, children negotiating friendship in the aftermath of trauma, affected Melanie profoundly. As the meeting concluded and families began gathering their belongings, she found herself blinking back tears at the resilience on display before her. Dr. Chun approached as Melanie prepared to leave. Thank you for coming today. Having a familiar adult from their life before the trauma is important for the twins. Will they be okay? Melanie asked, voicing the question that had haunted her since that rainy day at the Bennett house. All of them, will they recover from this? The therapist considered the question with the gravity it deserved. Children are remarkably adaptable, she said finally. With consistent support, therapy, and stable home environments, they have every chance of processing this trauma in healthy ways. She glanced toward the three boys, now reluctantly saying goodbye under their family's watchful eyes. The bond between them is unusual but potentially healing. They shared an experience no one else can fully understand. Even though it was born from something so terrible? Dr. Chin nodded. Sometimes meaningful connections emerge from the darkest circumstances. The twins provided Christopher comfort when he had none. Christopher gave them a sense of purpose during a time when their home life was chaotic with grief. There's a foundation there that, with proper guidance, could evolve into something positive. As Melanie prepared to leave, Liam approached her, tugging gently on her sleeve. When she knelt to his level, he surprised her by speaking, the first words she'd heard from him since before the discovery. Thank you for finding us, he whispered, the simple sentence laden with meaning beyond his years. Melanie struggled to respond, emotion closing her throat. You're very brave, Liam, she finally managed. Both of you are. The boy shook his head, his solemn eyes meeting hers directly. We just brought food. You're the one who saved Christopher. With that profound statement, he rejoined his brother and aunt, leaving Melanie momentarily speechless. Outside the Child Advocacy Center, autumn was giving way to early winter, the trees now mostly bare, the air carrying a crisp chill that promised snow before long. Melanie stood on the steps, watching as three separate families departed. The Reynolds with Christopher between them, hands clasped. Catherine ushering the twins toward her car, Noah chattering animatedly while Liam walked in thoughtful silence. The scene before her represented both an ending and a beginning. The criminal proceedings against Richard Bennett would continue for months, perhaps years. The psychological healing for all involved would be a lifelong journey marked by setbacks and breakthroughs. But today, in a carefully controlled environment, three little boys had taken their first steps toward reclaiming their narratives from the tragedy that had entangled them. As a kindergarten teacher, Melanie had always believed in the inherent goodness of children, their capacity for kindness and empathy even before they fully understood these concepts. The twins had demonstrated this in the most extraordinary way, bringing food and companionship to a captive boy, creating small moments of human connection in the darkness of their father's making. It was a reminder, Melanie thought as she finally turned toward her own car, that beneath the surface of even the most disturbing human behavior, beneath the layers of grief and madness that had driven Richard Bennett to his unforgivable act, the capacity for compassion remained. Sometimes in the most unexpected vessels, like two small boys sharing their lunch with a friend they believed needed protection. That knowledge wouldn't erase the horror of what had happened at 78 Hawthorne Drive. It wouldn't absolve Richard Bennett or magically heal the wounds inflicted on three innocent children. But it offered something essential for moving forward. The recognition that even in our darkest moments, humanity's better nature can persist, often in the simplest of gestures. A shared sandwich, a paper chess piece, a whispered story in the shadows of a basement where a little light still managed to shine through. Winter descended on Oakwood Hills with uncharacteristic ferocity. By early December, the town lay buried beneath 18 inches of snow, with more falling in steady, silent sheets that transformed the landscape into something otherworldly. Melanie stood at her classroom window, watching the flakes swirl and dance in the amber glow of the streetlights, mesmerized by their hypnotic pattern. 6 weeks had passed since the discovery at the Bennett house. 6 weeks of police interviews, preliminary hearings, media coverage that ranged from compassionate to sensationalistic, and the slow, painful process of helping 20 kindergartners understand why 2 of their classmates hadn't returned to school. "Miss Porter." Melanie turned to find Principal Grayson standing in her classroom doorway, his salt and pepper beard now more salt than pepper, his normally crisp dress shirt showing uncharacteristic wrinkles. The strain of recent events had taken its toll on the entire school staff, but particularly on Grayson, who'd fielded endless calls from concerned parents and reporters. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, gesturing to the papers spread across her desk. Incomplete Christmas crafts abandoned when the early dismissal was announced due to the worsening storm. "Not at all," Melanie assured him, moving away from the window. "Just watching the snow and thinking." Grayson nodded, understanding passing between them without need for elaboration. "There's someone here to see you, Detective Morgan." He said, "It's important." Melanie's heart stuttered. The detective's occasional updates had become less frequent as the case progressed from breaking news to the slower machinery of the justice system. An unscheduled visit could only mean significant developments. "He's in my office," Grayson added, his expression revealing nothing of what might have brought Morgan to the school during a snowstorm. The walk down the empty hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. The children's artwork that normally brought Melanie joy, paper snowflakes and cotton ball snowmen, now blurring into a meaningless collage in her peripheral vision. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had Richard Bennett changed his plea? Had new evidence emerged? Or, most troubling, had something happened to the twins? Morgan stood as she entered the principal's office, his weathered face revealing the same exhaustion she'd seen mirrored in her own bathroom mirror that morning. "Ms. Porter, thank you for making time. I know you're probably trying to get home before the roads become impassable." "It's no problem," she replied, taking the seat Grayson offered before discreetly excusing himself to give them privacy. "Is everything all right? Has something happened with the case?" Morgan settled back into his chair with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep within. "Yes and no. The district attorney has reached a plea agreement with Bennett's attorney. He'll plead guilty to kidnapping and false imprisonment in exchange for being remanded to a secure psychiatric facility rather than prison." "He's avoiding prison?" Melanie couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "Not exactly avoiding it. The psychiatric evaluation concluded he suffered a psychotic break following his wife's death. Multiple professionals have testified that his mental state meets the criteria for an insanity defense." Morgan's tone was measured, carefully neutral. "The state's psychiatric facility isn't a resort, Ms. Porter. It's a secure institution for the criminally insane. He'll likely spend decades there." Melanie absorbed this information slowly, uncertain how to feel. The thought of Richard Bennett receiving treatment rather than punishment stirred complicated emotions. A sense of justice denied, mixed with the intellectual understanding that his actions had stemmed from profound mental illness. "How do the Reynolds feel about this?" she asked finally. "They've agreed to it reluctantly. Angela Reynolds specifically said that if it spares the children from testifying at a trial, she can accept the outcome." Morgan leaned forward, his expression softening. "That's actually why I'm here. With the plea deal, there won't be a trial, which means the children won't be subjected to that trauma. But the Bennett's insurance is contesting the psychotherapy coverage for the twins." The abrupt change of subject threw Melanie momentarily. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with me?" Catherine Bennett is appealing the decision, arguing that the twins' trauma is a direct result of their father's actions and mental breakdown. The insurance company is claiming that since they weren't physically harmed, the extensive therapy being recommended isn't medically necessary. Morgan's disgust at this bureaucratic coldness was evident. "Catherine's lawyer believes your testimony about the changes you observed in the twins' behavior before and after the discovery could be crucial in the appeal hearing." "Of course I'll help," Melanie said without hesitation. "When is the hearing?" "Next Thursday, assuming the weather clears. I have the details here." He handed her a folder containing legal documents and contact information for Catherine's attorney. There's something else you should know. The media attention has finally started to die down, but Richard Bennett's court appearance will likely reignite interest. The court has ordered that the twins' identities remain protected. But people in town already know, Melanie finished for him. It was an unavoidable reality in a community the size of Oakwood Hills, where connections ran deep and information flowed through unofficial channels despite best efforts at discretion. Morgan nodded grimly. The Reynolds family is considering relocating. Fresh start. Away from the stares and whispers. They've asked if the twins could visit with Christopher one more time before they make any decisions. Catherine is hesitant, concerned about opening fresh wounds just as the boys seem to be stabilizing. What did their therapist recommend? Dr. Chun believes it could be beneficial, especially with the plea deal eliminating the prospect of a trial. Closure, she called it. Morgan's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. I thought you might have insight, given your relationship with the twins. Melanie considered the question carefully. The brief visit at the Child Advocacy Center had been both painful and healing for all three boys. Liam had spoken his first words in weeks that day, and Noah had mentioned Christopher frequently in the aftermath, processing the complex emotions through conversation in the way children often did. I think Dr. Chun is right, she said finally. The connection between the three of them is unique. They were each other's witnesses during an experience no one else can fully understand. Cutting that connection abruptly might leave too many unresolved questions, especially for Liam and Noah, who are still trying to reconcile their father's actions with the person they thought they knew. Morgan nodded, seemingly satisfied with her assessment. I'll convey that to Catherine. He rose, collecting his coat from the back of the chair. Thank you, Ms. Porter, for everything you've done for those boys, not just finding Christopher, but standing by the twins afterward. Not everyone would have had the compassion to see them as victims too. After Morgan departed, Melanie remained in Grayson's office, staring out at the thickening snowfall. The news of the plea deal settled over her like the snow blanketing the parking lot, a covering that changed the appearance of everything beneath it without altering its fundamental nature. Richard Bennett would be institutionalized rather than imprisoned. The twins would be spared the additional trauma of a trial, but would face a lifelong journey of processing their father's actions. Christopher Reynolds might move away, severing the strange bond that had formed between three children in the most unimaginable circumstances. And Melanie would continue to navigate the aftermath, balancing her role as educator with the unexpected position she now occupied in this tragic narrative. Not quite witness, not quite participant, but indelibly connected to a story that had forever altered her understanding of the darkness that could exist behind the most ordinary facades. The Bennett house looked transformed under its blanket of snow, the stark white covering softening its angles and obscuring the overgrown garden that had been one of the first signs of something amiss. Christmas lights twinkled along the eaves, Catherine's attempt at normalcy for the twins' sake, though Melanie suspected the holiday would be more endured than celebrated this year. She parked behind Catherine's Subaru, gathering the gift bags she'd brought, children's books about emotions, special paper for origami, and soft fleece blankets in blue and green to match the dragons she'd given the twins on her first visit. Nothing that could be interpreted as Christmas presents. Catherine had mentioned the holiday would be low-key, given the circumstances. Noah answered the door wearing mismatched socks and a sweater emblazoned with dinosaurs wearing Santa hats. "Miss Porter!" he exclaimed, his face lighting with genuine pleasure. "Did you see how much snow there is? Aunt Katie says we can build a snowman tomorrow if it stops." "I did see," Melanie replied, stepping inside and brushing snowflakes from her coat. "It's perfect snowman weather." "Where's your brother?" "In the kitchen with Aunt Katie. We're making cookies." Noah took her hand, leading her down the hallway. "Not Christmas cookies," he clarified, his expression suddenly serious. "Just regular ones. Aunt Katie says we don't have to do Christmas this year if we don't want to." The simple statement, delivered with a child's directness, revealed volumes about how Catherine was approaching the holiday season, allowing the twins to set the emotional pace rather than forcing traditions that might feel hollow in the wake of trauma. The kitchen was warm and flour-dusted, the scent of vanilla and brown sugar hanging in the air. Liam stood on a step stool at the counter, carefully cutting shapes from rolled dough with intense concentration. He looked up as Melanie entered, offering a small smile and a wave with his flour-covered hand. "Thanks for coming, especially in this weather," Catherine greeted her, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked more rested than during Melanie's previous visits. The desperate edge of those early weeks softened into a steady, determined resilience. "The boys have been looking forward to seeing you. I brought some things for them," Melanie said, setting the gift bags on a chair well away from the baking operation. "Books and art supplies. Nothing holiday-related." Catherine nodded appreciatively. "We're keeping it low-key this year. Dr. Chun suggested letting them take the lead on what traditions feel comfortable." She lowered her voice, though the boys were absorbed in their cookie cutting. "Liam still hasn't returned to regular speech patterns, but he's communicating more, drawing, writing notes. Noah has nightmares, but they're less frequent." Melanie watched as Liam carefully transferred a star-shaped cookie to the baking sheet, his movements deliberate and precise. Detective Morgan mentioned the insurance appeal. "I'll be there on Thursday to testify." "Thank you," Catherine replied, her relief evident. "The boys need this therapy, especially now when they're starting to process the reality of what happened. Richard's plea deal has brought everything up again." "Have you told them?" Catherine nodded, her expression grave. "As much as they can understand at 5. That their daddy did a very bad thing because his brain was sick, and now doctors are going to help him get better. But it will take a very long time." "How did they take it?" "Noah had a lot of questions. Will Daddy get better? Will he come home? Can we visit him? Liam." She glanced at her nephew, ensuring he was still absorbed in his task. Liam shut down completely for about 48 hours. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't write, barely ate. Then yesterday morning, he came down for breakfast and handed me this. Catherine reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded piece of construction paper. Inside was a childish drawing of 4 figures. 2 small ones labeled me and Noah, a taller female figure labeled Entikati, sick, and off to one side, a figure behind what appeared to be a fence or bars, labeled simply Dad. The figures weren't touching, and unlike Liam's usual drawings, none of them had smiles. "It's the first time he's acknowledged Richard as his father since everything happened," Catherine explained, carefully refolding the paper. "Dr. Chun says it's actually progress. He's beginning to integrate the reality rather than compartmentalizing." Before Melanie could respond, the kitchen timer buzzed, and Catherine turned her attention to the oven. "Why don't you take the boys into the living room while these bake? There's hot chocolate, and they've been wanting to show you their new therapy workbooks." The living room bore subtle signs of the changes in the Bennett household. Family photos had been rearranged to remove Richard's image without creating conspicuous gaps. Toys were neatly organized in bins, and a small desk had been set up in the corner with art supplies and journals. A workspace for therapy homework, Melanie guessed, where the twins could express feelings too complex for their limited vocabulary. Noah immediately began showing Melanie his workbook, proudly pointing to pages where he'd drawn pictures of emotions and completed exercises about identifying safe adults. Liam hung back initially, watching from the doorway until Melanie gently invited him to join them. "Your aunt tells me you've been doing really well in therapy," Melanie said, making space for Liam on the sofa beside her. "I'd love to see your workbook too, if you want to show me." For a moment, she thought he might refuse, but then he nodded and retrieved a folder from the desk. Unlike Noah's workbook with its colorful stickers and enthusiastic scribbles, Liam's contained meticulous drawings, detailed scenes showing the twins at school, at home with Catherine, and, most poignantly, a series depicting the basement where Christopher had been kept. Melanie studied these with particular care, noting how Liam had drawn himself and Noah bringing food and books to Christopher, playing games together, whispering stories in the dark. The images were disturbing in their innocence. 3 children creating moments of connection in the most horrific circumstances, none of them fully comprehending the wrongness of the situation. "These are very powerful drawings, Liam," Melanie said gently. They show exactly what happened, which is very brave. The boy nodded solemnly, turning to the last page in the folder. It showed Christopher sitting between his parents, with Liam and Noah standing nearby. Above the drawing, in careful block letters, was written, "Christopher is with his family now. We are with Aunt Katie." "That's right," Melanie affirmed, her heart aching at the simple truth the drawing conveyed. "Everyone is safe now, with people who care about them." Noah, not to be outdone by his brother's artistic display, tugged at Melanie's sleeve. "We're going to see Christopher again," he announced. "Before he moves away. Aunt Katie said we could if we want to." Melanie glanced toward the doorway where Catherine had appeared, a tray of cookies and hot chocolate balanced in her hands. "We received the formal request from the Reynolds family yesterday," she confirmed, setting the tray on the coffee table. "The boys have been discussing it ever since." "Are you comfortable with the idea?" Melanie asked, accepting a steaming mug. Catherine settled into an armchair, her expression thoughtful. "Initially, no. I worried it might be too confusing, too painful. But Dr. Chun thinks it could provide important closure, especially since the Reynolds are likely relocating." She glanced at the twins, who were carefully selecting cookies from the plate. "And the boys want to see him. They ask about him constantly." "He was our friend," Noah said matter-of-factly, dunking his cookie in hot chocolate. "Even though Daddy did a bad thing, Christopher was still our friend." The simple statement, delivered with a child's straightforward logic, captured the painful complexity of the situation. The twins had formed a genuine bond with Christopher during his captivity, a relationship built on their natural kindness and instinct to care for someone in need, despite the horrific context their father had created. "When will the visit happen?" Melanie asked. "Next week, at the Child Advocacy Center again. The Reynolds want to make their decision about moving before the holidays." Catherine lowered her voice. "Angela Reynolds called me herself. She said she doesn't blame the boys, that she knows they were victims too. But seeing them is still difficult for her. They remind her of what happened, of Richard." The admission hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. The twins' physical resemblance to their father, the same sandy hair, the same shaped eyes, meant they would always carry a visible connection to the man who had caused such devastating harm, a genetic echo of trauma written into their very features. Liam, who had been quietly eating his cookie, suddenly slid from the sofa and went to the desk. He returned with a piece of paper and a crayon, writing quickly before handing the note to Melanie. "Will you come when we see Christopher?" The request, written in his careful capitals, caught Melanie off guard. She looked to Catherine, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Dr. Chun suggested having a consistent, trusted adult present besides family members, Catherine explained. "Someone who understands the situation but isn't as emotionally entangled as I am." The boys immediately thought of you. Melanie felt the weight of this trust, this unexpected role she'd assumed in the twins' lives. What had begun as a teacher's concern for her students had evolved into something more profound, a witness to their trauma, a constant in the shifting landscape of their new reality. "Of course I'll come," she promised Liam, receiving a solemn nod in return. The remainder of the visit passed in quieter conversation, the twins showing Melanie their latest schoolwork. Catherine had arranged for a tutor to continue their kindergarten education at home until they were ready to return to a classroom setting. Noah chattered about their neighborhood friends who sometimes came to play, while Liam communicated through nods, gestures, and occasional written notes, a system that seemed to work for him despite its limitations. As Melanie prepared to leave, the snow still falling steadily outside, Catherine walked her to the door while the twins remained in the living room, absorbed in examining their new books. "There's something else," Catherine said quietly, her voice tense. "Richard's attorney contacted me yesterday. He wants to see the boys." "What?" Melanie couldn't mask her shock. "He can't possibly expect. Legally, his parental rights haven't been terminated yet," Catherine explained, her expression strained. "That process is ongoing, but until it's complete, he can request supervised visitation. My attorney is fighting it, of course, but it's another stress the boys don't need." "What does Dr. Chun say?" that it would be devastating for their progress right now. They're just beginning to process what happened, to understand that what their father did was terribly wrong. Catherine's voice caught. How do I protect them from this? They've already lost so much. The question hung between them, unanswerable in its enormity. Melanie reached out to squeeze Catherine's arm, a gesture of solidarity that felt woefully inadequate against the magnitude of the challenge facing her. One day at a time, she offered, echoing her earlier platitude but meaning it more deeply now. And you're not alone in this. The school, Dr. Chun, Detective Morgan, me. There's a whole community standing with you and the boys. Catherine nodded, squaring her shoulders with visible effort. The hearing for the restraining order is next Monday. My attorney is confident, given the circumstances, but until then, she trailed off, glancing back toward the living room where the twins sat side by side, heads bent over their new books, momentarily at peace in a world that had been shattered and was only now being reassembled in a new, unfamiliar configuration. Let me know if there's anything I can do, Melanie said, knowing the offer was inadequate but making it nonetheless. You're already doing it, Catherine replied simply. Being here, seeing the boys as more than victims or curiosities. That matters more than you know. As Melanie drove home through the snowy streets, her windshield wipers keeping rhythmic time with her thoughts, she reflected on the strange, solemn responsibility she'd assumed in the lives of Liam and Noah Bennett. She'd become more than their teacher. She was now a bridge between their before and after, someone who had known them when their world was intact and remained as they navigated its ruins. The weight of this role settled over her like the snow accumulating on the road before her. Beautiful in its way, but requiring careful navigation, attention to unseen dangers beneath the surface, and the understanding that what appeared solid could give way without warning. The Child Advocacy Center looked different in daylight, its cheerful facade a stark contrast to the somber purpose of the meeting taking place inside. Melanie arrived early, finding Catherine already in the waiting area, the twins seated beside her with identical expressions of nervous anticipation. The Reynolds aren't here yet, Catherine explained in a hushed tone as Melanie took the seat beside her. Christopher's been having a difficult morning, according to Angela. He almost changed his mind about coming. Melanie nodded, understanding the complexity of emotions the young boy must be experiencing. Wanting to see the twins who had shown him kindness during his captivity, yet associating them inevitably with the trauma he'd endured. How are Liam and Noah doing? She asked, noting the twins' unusual stillness. Typically, even in serious situations, they fidgeted or whispered to each other. Today they sat rigidly, hands clasped in their laps, eyes fixed on the door. Nervous, Catherine replied. They worked with Dr. Chun yesterday to prepare, drawing pictures of how they might feel seeing Christopher again, practicing what they might say. Liam hasn't spoken all morning, but that's not unusual before therapy sessions. The door opened and Dr. Chan emerged, her professional smile firmly in place though her eyes held a certain wariness. The Reynolds family has arrived. We're setting up in the blue room. She crouched before the twins, addressing them directly. Christopher is feeling a little scared today, just like you might be. It's okay to have big feelings about seeing each other again. That's why I'm here to help. Noah nodded solemnly. We brought something for him, he said, patting the small gift bag at his feet. Aunt Katie helped us pick it out. That was very thoughtful, dear, Chan affirmed, rising to lead them down the hallway. Christopher brought something for you too. The blue room was designed for therapeutic play, equipped with comfortable furniture, art supplies, games, and a discreet observation window where professionals could monitor interactions without being intrusive. Christopher already waited inside, seated between his parents on a small sofa, clutching his ever-present teddy bear. The boy looked markedly healthier than at their last meeting. His cheeks fuller, his eyes clearer, though still holding shadows no child his age should carry. He wore a red sweater and jeans, his hair neatly combed, appearing for all intents and purposes like any ordinary 7-year-old. Only the white-knuckled grip on his bear betrayed his anxiety. Angela Reynolds managed a tight smile as they entered, while Michael nodded curtly, his arm protectively around his son's shoulders. The tension in their postures was palpable, parents forced to confront living reminders of the nightmare their family had endured. For a long moment, no one spoke. The adults remained frozen in a tableau of uncertain protocol, while the children regarded each other across a divide far greater than the few feet of carpeted floor between them. It was Noah who finally broke the silence. "Hi, Christopher," he said simply, his voice small but steady. "We brought you something." He nudged his brother, and Liam stepped forward, offering the gift bag with solemn ceremony. Christopher accepted it cautiously, glancing at his mother for permission before peering inside. He withdrew a small wooden chess set, his eyes widening in recognition. "It's like the paper one we made," he said softly, running his fingers over the carved pieces. "Aunt Katie helped us find it," Noah explained. "So you can play real chess now, not just paper chess." The simple gift, a chess set to replace the makeshift paper version the boys had created during Christopher's captivity, carried symbolic weight far beyond its practical value. It acknowledged their shared past while transforming it into something new, something untainted by the circumstances of their initial connection. Christopher carefully set the chess set aside and reached into his backpack, withdrawing a flat package wrapped in blue paper. "I made this for you," he said, offering it to the twins with a hesitant smile. "Mom helped me." Liam accepted the gift, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a framed drawing. 3 stick figures standing together, labeled me, Liam, and Noah. Above them, in a child's careful printing, "Thank you for being nice to me." The simple artwork seemed to dissolve the remaining tension in the room. Noah moved toward Christopher, asking if he wanted to try out the chess set. Liam followed more cautiously, still clutching the framed drawing. Within minutes, the 3 boys were seated at a small table, Christopher explaining the proper rules of chess while the twins listened with rapt attention. Dr. Chun motioned the adults to the far side of the room, where they could observe without hovering. "This is going remarkably well," she murmured. Children often navigate these situations more naturally than adults. They don't carry the same burden of analysis and implication. Melanie watched as Liam, who hadn't spoken a word all morning, leaned forward to whisper something in Christopher's ear. The older boy nodded seriously before responding in equally hushed tones. These private exchanges, reminiscent of their basement whispers, seemed to carry a significance the adults could only guess at, shared experiences processed through the limited emotional vocabulary of children. "We're planning to move next month," Angela said quietly, her gaze fixed on her son. "Michael's company has a position in Colorado. We think a fresh start would be best for Christopher." "The boys will miss him," Catherine replied, her tone carefully neutral. "But I understand your decision. Will you tell Christopher today?" Angela shook her head. "We've discussed the possibility with him, but we'll wait until after the holidays to make it official. His therapist advised against too many changes at once." The conversation continued in hushed tones, practical details mixed with deeper concerns about the children's long-term recovery, while at the small table, an entirely different interaction unfolded. The chess game had been abandoned in favor of drawing, the 3 boys working together on a large sheet of paper, passing markers back and forth in a collaborative effort. Melanie moved closer, curious about their creation. The drawing depicted what appeared to be a park, with 3 figures playing beneath a large tree, while adult figures watched from nearby benches. It was a scene of ordinary childhood, remarkable only in its normalcy. 3 boys imagining a reality where they could simply be friends without the shadow of trauma hanging over their relationship. "Can we go to a real park someday?" Noah was asking, adding a swing set to their drawing. "All 3 of us?" Christopher looked uncertain, glancing toward his parents. "I don't know. We might be moving away." "How far?" Liam asked, his voice so unexpected that all 3 adults turned in surprise. It was the first time he'd spoken aloud during the session, his words slightly rusty from disuse but clear. "Colorado," Christopher replied. "That's really far from here." Liam nodded, absorbing this information with the serious contemplation that characterized him. "We could write letters," he suggested after a moment, "and draw pictures to send." The simple solution, offered in the practical way of children, brought a sad smile to Angela's face. "I think that would be nice," she said, approaching the table. "Christopher could have pen pals." The remainder of the session passed in this careful dance between acknowledgement of the past and tentative steps toward a future where the connection between the three boys might be preserved in some form, transformed from the trauma bond of their initial meeting into something healthier. As the visit drew to a close, Dr. Chun facilitated a structured goodbye, emphasizing that while Christopher would be moving away, he would not disappear from the twins' lives entirely. Letters, occasional video calls, perhaps even visits during summer vacations, all possibilities for maintaining a connection that, despite its troubling origins, had become significant to all three children. The final moments were the most difficult. Christopher hugged the twins goodbye with a fierce intensity that spoke volumes about the complex emotions beneath his 7-year-old surface. "Thank you for the food," he whispered, echoing his words from their first meeting at the center. "And the stories when it was dark." Noah hugged him back just as tightly. "We didn't know how to help more," he said, his voice small with regret beyond his years. "We thought Daddy was telling the truth." "I know," Christopher assured him with a wisdom that broke Melanie's heart. "You were just little kids. Like me." Liam, who had been hanging back, suddenly stepped forward and pressed something into Christopher's hand. A folded paper chess knight, identical to the one he'd given him at their first meeting. No words accompanied the gesture, but none were needed. The symbolism was clear to everyone watching. A reminder of how they had found moments of play and connection amidst darkness, how they had created beauty from the limited resources available to them. As the Reynolds family departed, Christopher clutching his new chess set in one hand and the paper knight in the other. A complex mixture of emotions hung in the air: grief for what these children had endured, hope for their recovery, and the bittersweet recognition that the bond between them, while born of terrible circumstances, had become a genuine connection that deserved to be honored rather than severed. In the quiet aftermath, Dr. Chun gathered the twins for a debriefing session, allowing Catherine and Melanie a moment alone in the hallway. "Liam spoke," Catherine said, wonder and relief evident in her voice. "Complete sentences in front of everyone." Melanie nodded, equally moved by the breakthrough. Something about seeing Christopher again must have given him permission to find his voice. Dr. Chun said it might happen like that. Suddenly, when the emotional context feels right. Catherine glanced toward the closed door where the session continued. "This visit was the right decision, despite my reservations. I think all three of them needed it." "What about the restraining order?" Melanie asked, lowering her voice further. "Has there been any update?" Catherine's expression darkened. "The hearing is tomorrow. My attorney is confident, given the circumstances, but Richard's lawyer is arguing that supervised visitation would benefit the twins' recovery process." She shook her head in disbelief, as if seeing the man who kidnapped a child and kept him prisoner in their basement would somehow help them heal. "Will you have to take the twins to court?" "No, thank God. They've submitted statements from Dr. Chun and the child welfare caseworker recommending against any contact at this stage." Catherine ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of exhaustion Melanie had come to recognize. "I just want it settled so we can move forward without this hanging over us." Before Melanie could respond, the therapy room door opened, and Dr. Chun emerged with the twins. Noah was chattering animatedly about their visit with Christopher, while Liam walked beside him in thoughtful silence, though the rigid tension that had characterized him earlier had visibly eased. "A very successful session," Dr. Chun informed them, professional satisfaction evident in her tone. "We've processed some big emotions and made important progress today." As they prepared to leave, Liam tugged gently at Melanie's sleeve, waiting until she crouched to his level. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice soft but steady, the words carefully formed as though he was relearning how to use them. "Thank you for speaking," Melanie replied simply, understanding the courage it had taken for him to break his silence. The boy nodded solemnly, his eyes conveying what his limited vocabulary couldn't yet express: gratitude, trust, and the beginning of healing. like the first green shoots emerging after a devastating forest fire. The courtroom was smaller than Melanie had expected, its wood-paneled walls and formal atmosphere at odds with the deeply personal nature of the proceedings taking place within. She sat in the back row, present to support Catherine but not scheduled to testify until the insurance appeal later that week. The restraining order hearing had been closed to the public due to the involvement of minors, the gallery occupied only by essential parties and their representatives. At the plaintiff's table, Catherine sat beside her attorney, her posture rigid with tension despite the professional confidence her lawyer projected. Across the aisle, Richard Bennett's attorney sat alone, his client's absence conspicuous but expected. He remained in the psychiatric facility where he'd been remanded following his plea agreement. Judge Eleanor Winters presided with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had spent decades navigating the murky intersection of law and human suffering. In her late 60s, with silver hair cropped close to her head and wire-rimmed glasses perched on a prominent nose, she commanded the courtroom with quiet authority. We're here today to consider the petition for a permanent restraining order filed by Catherine Bennett, acting as legal guardian for minors Liam and Noah Bennett, against their father, Richard Bennett, Judge Winters stated, reviewing the documents before her. I've read the submissions from both sides, including the psychiatric evaluations and recommendations from the children's therapist. Catherine's attorney rose, a tall woman with a subtle Southern accent that emerged despite her formal diction. Your Honor, we believe the evidence clearly demonstrates that any contact between Richard Bennett and his sons at this stage would be detrimental to their psychological recovery. Dr. Rebecca Chen, who has been treating the boys since October, has submitted an extensive evaluation supporting this conclusion. The judge nodded, turning her attention to Richard's lawyer. Counselor, your response? The defense attorney, a younger man with the polished appearance of someone from an expensive firm, stood with practiced confidence. Your Honor, we acknowledge the serious nature of the circumstances, but we maintain that permanently severing the relationship between a father and his children is an extreme step that requires substantial justification. While Mr. Bennett has accepted responsibility for his actions regarding Christopher Reynolds, he remains deeply concerned for his son's welfare. Melanie felt a surge of indignation at the carefully constructed argument, which somehow managed to portray Richard Bennett as a caring father despite the horrific trauma he had inflicted on his own children. She watched Catherine's shoulders tense, though her expression remained composed. Mr. Bennett has been diagnosed with delusional disorder with psychotic features. The defense attorney continued. His mental health condition directly contributed to his actions which he now recognizes as profoundly wrong. As he progresses in treatment, supervised contact with his sons could eventually become a positive element in all their recoveries. Judge Winters remained impassive, though something flickered in her eyes. Skepticism, perhaps, or the weariness of someone who had heard too many justifications for the unjustifiable. Dr. Levin, the court-appointed psychiatrist who evaluated Mr. Bennett, has noted that maintaining family connections, when appropriate and carefully supervised, can be beneficial to patients with similar conditions, the lawyer pressed. We are not asking for immediate visitation, merely that the door be left open for possible future contact, at the recommendation of both Mr. Bennett's treating physicians and the children's therapist. The judge turned to Catherine's attorney. Your response, counselor? Catherine's lawyer rose, her expression grave. Your Honor, this argument fundamentally mischaracterizes the situation. We're not discussing a father who made a regrettable but ordinary mistake. Mr. Bennett kidnapped a child and imprisoned him in the family home for 6 months, manipulating his 5-year-old sons into participating in the deception. The trauma inflicted on these children is profound and ongoing. She lifted a folder from the table. In her evaluation, Dr. Chun describes the twins' ongoing struggle with trust, their confusion about moral boundaries, and their difficulty reconciling the father they knew with the man who committed these crimes. Liam Bennett developed selective mutism as a direct result of this trauma, only recently beginning to speak again. Noah Bennett experiences severe nightmares centered around themes of deception and abandonment. The attorney paused, allowing the weight of these details to settle over the courtroom. To suggest that contact with the architect of this trauma would be beneficial to these children flies in the face of all established psychological understanding of childhood trauma recovery. The mere suggestion of seeing their father has caused significant regression in their progress. For the next hour, the attorneys presented their arguments, occasionally referring to reports from various experts or citing relevant precedents. Throughout, Catherine remained still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Melanie watched from her position in the back row, struck by the clinical dissection of what she knew to be a deeply human tragedy. Finally, Judge Winters removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose wearily before addressing the courtroom. Having reviewed all submitted materials and heard arguments from both parties, I am prepared to rule on this matter. The courtroom fell completely silent, the air heavy with anticipation. The primary consideration in cases involving minors must always be the best interests of the children. Judge Winters began, her tone measured. These best interests must be evaluated based on expert testimony, observable impacts, and the specific circumstances of each case. She shuffled the papers before her, continuing with deliberate care. It is clear from the evaluations provided by Dr. Chan, as well as reports from the children's court-appointed guardian ad litem, that Liam and Noah Bennett have suffered significant psychological trauma as a direct result of their father's actions. This trauma has manifested in serious developmental and psychological symptoms that are only now beginning to respond to intensive therapy. The judge fixed her gaze on the defense attorney. While I acknowledge Dr. Levin's general observation that family connections can be beneficial in some mental health recovery contexts, this generalized principle cannot override the specific, documented harm that even the prospect of contact with their father causes these children. She turned her attention to Catherine's attorney. I find the evidence compelling that continued separation from Richard Bennett is necessary for the twins' recovery at this time. Therefore, I am granting the petition for a permanent restraining order, prohibiting Richard Bennett from any contact, direct or indirect, with Liam and Noah Bennett. Catherine's shoulders sagged visibly with relief, though her expression remained composed. However, the judge continued, raising a finger, I am including a provision that this order may be reviewed annually, beginning 2 years from today, upon petition from either party and with updated psychological evaluations from qualified professionals treating both Mr. Bennett and the children. This acknowledges the possibility, however remote it may currently seem, that circumstances could change as the children mature and Mr. Bennett progresses in treatment. She looked between the two attorneys, her expression stern. To be absolutely clear, this provision is not an expectation that contact will be resumed, merely a recognition that the needs of these children may evolve over time, and that the court remains available to reevaluate based on those needs. The burden of proving that any contact would not be harmful will rest entirely with Mr. Bennett. With a decisive tap of her gavel, Judge Winters concluded the hearing. Order so entered. We're adjourned. The formality of the proceedings dissolved as Catherine rose, embracing her attorney with visible emotion. Melanie approached cautiously, uncertain of her place in this moment. It's over, Catherine said as she caught sight of Melanie, her voice unsteady with relief. At least for 2 years. The boys are safe. That's wonderful news, Melanie replied, genuine relief flooding through her. How are you feeling? Catherine gave a shaky laugh. Like I can finally breathe again. This was the last major hurdle. The custody arrangement is permanent. The restraining order is in place. She gathered her belongings with hands that trembled slightly. Now we can focus completely on healing, on moving forward. As they exited the courthouse, stepping into the crisp December air, Melanie was struck by the strange normalcy of the scene before them. People hurrying along the sidewalks carrying shopping bags, holiday decorations glittering in store windows, a group of carolers practicing on the corner. The ordinary world continued, oblivious to the profound decisions that had just altered the course of 2 small lives forever. Will you tell the boys about the ruling? Melanie asked as they walked toward the parking lot. Not the legal details, Catherine replied, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. Just that everything is settled now, that they'll be staying with me, and that they don't have to worry about seeing their father unless someday, when they're much older, they decide they want to. She paused at her car, turning to Melanie with an expression of quiet determination. Dr. Chun says we need to start building new memories, new traditions. That's why I decided to get a small Christmas tree after all. The boys have been through enough loss. They shouldn't lose the joy of holidays too. Richard doesn't get to take that from them as well. Melanie nodded, understanding the importance of this small act of reclamation. That sounds like a perfect next step. As Catherine drove away with a final wave, Melanie remained standing in the parking lot, snow beginning to fall in gentle flakes that melted on contact with the pavement. The restraining order was a victory, undoubtedly, a necessary protection for the twins as they struggled to rebuild their sense of safety and trust. Yet beneath the legal language and formal proceedings lay a tragedy that no court decision could fully address. Two little boys forced to reconcile that their father, the man they had trusted above all others, had committed an unforgivable act and drawn them unwittingly into his delusion. How did one heal from such a fracture in the foundation of childhood? Melanie wondered. The twins would have the best professional help available, a loving guardian in Catherine, and a community ready to support them. But some wounds left scars that never fully faded, altering the landscape of a life irrevocably. She thought of Liam's breakthrough at the Child Advocacy Center, his small voice emerging after weeks of silence, and Noah's earnest efforts to make sense of what had happened through endless questions and conversations. Their resilience was remarkable, but the path ahead remained long and uncertain. With a deep breath, Melanie turned toward her own car, reminded that tomorrow brought another legal battle, the insurance appeal hearing, where she would testify about the changes she'd observed in the twins before and after the discovery at the Bennett house. Another small step in the long process of ensuring these children received what they needed to heal, to grow, to eventually thrive despite the traumatic beginning to their story. The insurance appeal hearing proved less dramatic than the restraining order proceedings, but no less consequential for the twins' future. In the sterile conference room of the corporate office building, Melanie delivered her testimony with the precise, documentation-backed approach she developed during her years in education, detailing the behavioral changes she'd observed, the interventions she'd attempted, and the profound impact of trauma on the twins' academic and social development. The insurance company representatives listened with impassive expressions, occasionally making notes or consulting their materials, while Catherine's attorney built a methodical case for the necessity of continued intensive therapy. By the afternoon's end, no decision had been reached. That would come in writing within 10 business days, but Catherine's attorney seemed cautiously optimistic as they departed. "Your testimony was compelling," she assured Melanie as they walked to their cars. "Particularly your observations about Liam's selective mutism and Noah's regression in fine motor skills. Those are quantifiable impacts that directly affect their educational outcomes, which is language insurance companies understand." The following days passed in a blur of end-of-semester activities at school, the typical December frenzy heightened by the approaching holidays. Melanie threw herself into these routines, finding comfort in the ordinary challenges of managing 20 excitable kindergartners amid the sugar-fueled chaos of classroom celebrations. On the last day before winter break, as children departed with handmade ornaments and holiday cards, Principal Grayson stopped by her classroom. "Got a minute?" he asked, holding a manila envelope. Melanie nodded, setting aside the worksheets she'd been organizing. "What's up?" "Two things," he said, closing the door for privacy. "First, Catherine Bennett called this morning. The insurance appeal was successful. The twins' therapy will be covered for the next year, with evaluations for continued treatment after that." "That's wonderful news," Melanie replied, genuine relief flooding through her. The financial burden of twice-weekly therapy sessions had been weighing heavily on Catherine, who had taken a leave of absence from her job in Seattle to care for the twins. "Second," Grayson continued, handing her the envelope, "the school board reviewed your actions in the Bennett case and issued this official commendation. They were particularly impressed by your adherence to ethical guidelines while still taking necessary steps to ensure a child's safety." Melanie accepted the envelope with surprise. In the aftermath of the discovery, she'd been so focused on the twins' well-being and the legal proceedings that she'd given little thought to her own professional standing. "There was some discussion," Grayson added, his expression turning serious, "about whether following students home crossed a professional boundary. But given the outcome, a kidnapped child rescued, two vulnerable students protected, the board ultimately determined your actions were not only justified but exemplary. She opened the envelope, scanning the formal letter with its official letterhead and flowery language praising her dedication to student welfare and exceptional judgment in extraordinary circumstances. I don't know what to say, she admitted, the recognition feeling somehow disconnected from the reality of what had happened. The gut-wrenching fear when she'd peered through that basement window, the twins' confused terror as their father was arrested, the long path to healing that still stretched before those three boys. Grayson seemed to understand her ambivalence. No one goes into teaching expecting to face something like this, he said quietly. But when the moment came, you did the right thing, Melanie. That matters. After he left, Melanie remained at her desk, the commendation letter before her, thinking not of professional accolades but of three children bound together by circumstance. Liam with his careful drawings and newly rediscovered voice, Noah with his earnest questions and protective instincts toward his brother, and Christopher, moving toward a new life in Colorado, carrying with him both the trauma of captivity and the memory of two small boys who had brought him food and comfort in the darkness. The ringing of her phone interrupted these thoughts. Catherine's name flashed on the screen, and Melanie answered quickly. I just heard about the insurance appeal. Congratulations. Thank you, Catherine replied, her voice warm with relieved gratitude. It's an enormous weight lifted, but that's not why I'm calling. The boys have something they want to ask you. There was a shuffling sound, and then Noah's voice came through the speaker. Miss Porter? We're getting our Christmas tree today, and Aunt Katie said we could invite someone special to help us decorate it. Will you come? The simple invitation, delivered in a child's hopeful tone, caught Melanie off guard. In the blur of professional responsibilities and legal proceedings, she'd momentarily lost sight of the most fundamental truth of this entire situation. At its heart were two 5-year-old boys trying to reclaim some measure of normalcy and joy. I'd love to, she replied without hesitation. Liam wants to talk to you too, Noah said, and there was another rustling sound before Liam's voice, still cautious but steadier than the last time she'd heard it, came through the speaker. We're making paper snowflakes, he said, the simple statement carrying the weight of ordinary childhood excitement. And popcorn strings. Christopher showed us how before he left. The mention of Christopher, integrated so naturally into the conversation, spoke volumes about the twins' ongoing process of healing, acknowledging what had happened while carefully separating the trauma from the genuine connection they'd formed with the older boy. That sounds wonderful, Melanie said, her throat tightening with emotion. I'm very good at paper snowflakes. I'll show you some special patterns. After ending the call, she sat in her empty classroom, surrounded by the evidence of 20 small lives, temporarily paused for the holiday break. Construction paper scraps, glitter that would likely remain embedded in the carpet until June, half-finished art projects forgotten in cubbies, the beautiful, messy artifacts of ordinary childhood. For 19 of her students, winter break meant 2 weeks of family celebrations, perhaps travel to visit relatives, the excitement of presents and special foods. For Liam and Noah, it represented another transition, another recalibration of what family meant in the aftermath of profound upheaval. Yet in their invitation, Melanie heard something profoundly hopeful. The resilience of children, their capacity to find joy even as they processed pain beyond their years. They were decorating a Christmas tree with their aunt. They were making paper snowflakes and popcorn strings. They were, in their own way, moving forward one small step at a time. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave for the holiday, Melanie found herself thinking of that first moment of suspicion all those weeks ago. Two solemn little boys carefully dividing their lunches, secreting away food for what they called their secret friend. That instinct toward kindness, even when manipulated by their father's delusion, had been genuine. It had provided Christopher with not only physical sustenance but the crucial emotional knowledge that he wasn't entirely alone in his captivity. The tragedy that had unfolded from that point could not be undone. Richard Bennett remained in a psychiatric facility, his sons in their aunt's care, Christopher and his family preparing to start anew in Colorado. The fracture lines created by those events would always be part of these children's histories, visible in therapy sessions, in midnight fears, in moments of unexpected triggering. Yet alongside those fractures, something else had emerged. A capacity for healing, for connection, for finding meaning even in the darkest circumstances. Liam and Noah had demonstrated this in their concern for Christopher, in their careful processing of what their father had done, in their slow, painful journey toward understanding. And perhaps, Melanie thought as she locked her classroom door behind her, that was the true lesson of this harrowing chapter, that even when the foundations of safety and trust are shattered, the human spirit retains its remarkable ability to begin again, to find new ground on which to build, to create meaning from chaos. Tonight she would help two little boys decorate a Christmas tree, an ordinary act of celebration that in this context became something more profound. A declaration that darkness would not have the final word, that small acts of joy and connection could illuminate even the longest night. Outside the school, snow had begun to fall again, transforming the playground equipment into ghostly shapes beneath a white blanket. Melanie paused to watch the flakes drift down, each one unique in its crystalline structure, each one part of the greater whole that would, by morning, remake the familiar landscape into something new. Like the twins, like Christopher, like all who survive profound trauma, the world constantly engaged in this process of destruction and renewal, of endings that contained within them the seeds of new beginnings. And in that cyclical truth lay a kind of hope, not the shallow optimism that denied the reality of suffering, but the deeper faith that acknowledged pain while refusing to grant it victory over the human capacity for resilience, for compassion, for grace in the face of life's most savage storms. With that thought warming her against the winter chill, Melanie walked toward her car, toward an evening of paper snowflakes and popcorn strings, toward two little boys who had witnessed darkness beyond their years, yet still found the courage to reach for light.